I don't know why. I don't know how to look at the Zoom screen and the Facebook screen at the same time.
Stephanie, we live.
We are live, guys.
Okay.
We're live.
All right, so I'll share.
Facebook screen at the same time. Stephanie, we live.
We are live, guys. We're live.
All right. All right. Hi everyone. Hi, Annissa. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us. I'm Stephanie Rodriguez Ruiz, South End Roxbury Community Partnership, and I'm joined here with Jahida Lopez, and I think I'll just stop and let everyone introduce themselves. So if you don't mind, I'll popcorn over to Izzy. You can introduce yourself.
Is it me or Isabel? Sorry.
Isabel's Isa X.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Welcome, Annissa. We appreciate your time. My name is Isaiah Garcia. I originally grew up in the South End area. I'm in Randolph now. We appreciate your time today.
I could go next. My name is Isabel, and I am one of the organizers for C Roxbury, and thank you for coming. I'll be asking some questions with Stephanie.
Hi, Annissa. You know me. I'll be asking some questions as well. I'm sure you expect nothing less.
Hey, Annissa, how are you? It's Jahida. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to this conversation.
Annissa, maybe you
What
want
it do?
Hey, Annissa, this is Ryan Fisher. I'm the one with the link screen or the phone number, but I'll be on my computer in about 5 minutes. But South End resident for 10 plus years now, and been involved in South End Roxbury Partnership since last summer. So looking forward to talking to you today.
I think Domingos is still up.
Domingos?
Good evening, folks. Domingos DeRosa, member of the South End Roxbury Community Partnership.
Thanks everybody for welcoming me. I appreciate the opportunity to be on and talk about my work as a city councilor and what I'd like to do in my capacity as mayor of Boston. I'm also joined this evening by Malika Lucien, who's on my team, my campaign team, but formerly at one point served in my city council office and actually participated in a lot of this work, certainly in partnership with me, but in partnership by extension with our neighborhood organizations and so many of you that have done a lot of this work for a long period of time.
Thank you. So I wanted to start by saying, well, now that we're live on Facebook, I want to clarify that one of the reasons that we asked to meet with you and that we've met with other candidates is because we want to really put this information out there, let all the candidates have an opportunity to give, some background as to what they have done during their time in office, because, as you know, a lot of the candidates have been or are city councilors, but also just to give some background as to what your plans are for mass and CAS and the opioid crisis that we're seeing now and have seen for many years, but to also give people some information and to equip them with the knowledge that they need as they go to the, the voter booths now in September and then again in November. So a lot of the questions that we'll be asking, if we give a little bit of context before the questions, it's just because some of the people, a lot of our following is just because some of them don't know some of the context behind the questions.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Thank you.
Definitely.
And we'll also maybe throw into the chat box on Facebook. I'm not sure if we can, a link to our public health plan as well as our some of the work around the public health surge.
That would be great. That would be great if you guys can see on the Facebook. You can go onto our page, and I know Jahida is really great with that too. At just dropping in links. So that
perfect. And if we can't do it now, we'll do it later.
Perfect. So then I'll just jump right in with the first question, which is the burning one. And I think you are the most appropriate person to speak to about this, because you are the candidate right now who has been the chair and is the vice chair of the Public Health Committee. During your time as City Councilor at large, you have, I know at one point was the chair of the Public Health Committee, and I believe right now, vice chair. So for those who are watching right now, what the committee does is oversee two different groups, right? One being the Public Health Commission, and the other the Office of Recovery Services. And what they do is a number of things, right? Overseeing, let's say, youth services, or syringe recovery, or helping with addiction and getting people beds and services that they need. But we've noticed, of course, over the years, it's been getting worse and worse. And of course, with the pandemic, there's been, it's been way worse. We're now seeing tents. We're now seeing an uptick in crime. And there's been a complete failure, for lack of a better word, right now in that department to lead. And we know that, if there's a failure in that department and the committee oversees that department, that it's essentially shows an ineffectiveness of leadership in that committee. And so just calling it how it is, tell the voters why it is you should be essentially promoted to mayor, if at this point, just as your position as a vice chair of the committee, there's already been a demonstration of ineffective leadership.
Okay, so there's a little bit there. So I'm going to go in a couple of different spots and hopefully give a little bit of historical context and a deeper understanding for those tuning in at home, how council committees are structured, what their true authority and oversight is, and how they should be working in partnership with the administration that actually has a power and authority over those departments in their work. So as Stephanie mentioned, my name is Annissa Essaibi George. I've been an at-large city councilor since I was sworn into office in 2016. When I joined the city council in 2016, I was the founding chair of a committee called Homelessness, Mental Health, and Recovery. And through the chairmanship of that committee, it brought me to this work, where I did lead on issues around homelessness, both on the individual side as well as the family side. It brought me to the work around the work we need to do around recovery and supporting individuals with substance use disorder, certainly responding to the opioid crisis. And I would note that we are certainly still in the midst very much of an opioid crisis, but as the drugs change on the street, we are now also dealing with a stimulant use disorder. As the drugs change, the response to that crisis also needs to change. And at the root of so much of this, whether it was a precursor or an after effect, mental illness is a very real disorder that so many individuals experience, whether they're dealing with a substance use disorder, a stimulant use disorder, or dealing with experiencing being unsheltered. Over 4 years, I chaired that committee, and through that work, it brought us to increasing the capacity of the Mobile Sharps team. Still not enough when we think about the work that they're doing to collect needles across our city, to do outreach services, and to support some of our more vulnerable residents, and also respond to 311 calls and posts. Through that council, or through that committee on the council, I also did a lot of work around looking at the efficacy of safe injection sites and safe consumption sites, and went and looked at what's happening in Vancouver and in Toronto, and how they rolled out their programs, what the success of their programs was for both individuals dealing with substance use disorder and the communities in which they existed. I will also say that through those 4 years on the council, I was chairing that committee. I was also able to bring together decision makers at various levels of government. I did have a great relationship and a working relationship with those in the administration doing the work, through the Office of Health and Human Services, the Office of Recovery Services. And we also have had partners, both legislative elected members of the state legislature and people in the administration, whether it was through Health and Human Services, DTA, the Department of Transitional Assistance, Department of Housing and Community Development, which oversees a lot of our shelter systems statewide, at the table, looking at and working to repair the continuum of care and the real challenges in delivering services to individuals who are in crisis, and then also responding to the needs of our city's residents. Because of that leadership, I was appointed to the Mass and CAS task force under the Walsh administration. When then Councilor Janey became council president at the beginning of 2020. She dismantled that committee, created a new committee on public health with a new chair, broke up some of that work. So homelessness now exists in the housing committee, mental health and recovery exists sort of under the public health committee. I am the committee's vice chair, and still continue very much to work on those issues as they are related together, and spoke very clearly about how disappointed I was when we dismantled that committee and broke up those three sort of subject areas, because individuals at Mass and CAS and in every part of our city, we have individuals who are experiencing those three things simultaneously and are at a true moment of crisis. When you talk about the complete failure of our continuum of care, you've talked about our complete failure as a city, as a system, as an elected body focused on these issues. We've continued to fail both the individuals who are in distress and the communities that they are sheltering in, that they are spending time in, that they are experiencing and living through sexual violence and human trafficking, as well as sleeping, when we think about the impact of tents in our city and across our community. So that work has been a big part of my work as a city councilor, and we, yes, have continued to fail our community, our city, our neighbors, and our unsheltered residents. We have to do more. So when I think about how important it is to have a city council that is authorized to do this work, we need a mayor who is willing to lead on these issues, who is not afraid to spend time walking at Mass and CAS and in other parts of our community, having conversations with individuals who are living these experiences and building relationship and responding to the needs of those that live in the community, who are building a business in the community or going to work in the community. So for me, that has very much been a part of my life, a part of my work. I have led on increasing the number of mental health professionals who are co-responding with Boston Police from 2 to 4 to now 19 city-funded positions to do this work to help our most vulnerable. Yes, COVID, the bridge, and so many other challenges, including a changing drug market. When we see the increase of crystal meth, we see an increase in sexual violence, human trafficking, and sort of more, I hate to say this out loud, but traditional assault on our streets and in that area. I've also led on making sure that we are responding to, again, we still fail in many ways in responding to the needs of our city's residents around human waste pickup. But I led on the work to at least have our Public Works Department be able to do more of that so that it doesn't all rest on our city's residents. We've got more work to do in that space for sure. I think that it should have remained its own committee so that that focus and that work could have continued in the same way with the same sort of rigor and vigor that it did beforehand. As mayor, I will remain focused on that work and work in partnership, not just with those that are providing the public service and doing the outreach, but with the community members at large on this. I don't want to keep going because I've got a lot to say, but I want to make sure we get questions in.
The next question is, in the past, you have voiced your support for safe injection sites.
I have never voiced my support for safe injection sites. That's incorrect.
All right, but we're now hearing that you are no longer supporting safe injection sites. What caused you to change your position?
I have never supported safe consumption sites. I'm actually, I think, the only candidate who is opposed to safe injection, safe consumption, and I have been for my entire time on the city council. I went to Vancouver and to Toronto to meet with providers, healthcare providers and service providers who work in safe consumption sites to understand the opportunity that they could present. And if I saw, which I did not see, a more direct correlation between safe consumption sites and safe injection sites and longer term recovery, I might my position might then change. I did not see that. And what we saw is individuals who are in crisis certainly benefiting from having access to a safe consumption site, safe injection site in their moment of using. But we also know that individuals will not travel more than 1/4 mile to access a safe injection site. And when you are dealing with illness due to withdrawal, it's really hard to get yourself to a safe consumption site or a safe injection site. And in order for them to be more constructive and productive and useful for individuals, we would have to have very many of them in our city. In Toronto, for example, which has a population similar in size to Boston, they have 60 safe consumption sites and safe injection sites. There is a great expense that goes into opening safe consumption, safe injection sites, several $1 million to open and operate a safe injection site over the course of any calendar year or 1 year mark. And I think that those resources are much better spent in creating more longer term recovery programs, opportunities for supportive housing, opportunities for family reunification, for workforce development, for mental health, and for other programs. I think that, the item that passed at the State House was to open one safe injection site in the city of Boston or in Suffolk County and one outside. We know where that would be placed, and we know the additional burden that would put on the South End and Lower Roxbury in particular, because that's likely where it would be sited. We need to work towards decentralization. We need to work towards getting individuals into treatment, into care, and to get them the help that they deserve, that they need. We also need to do this certainly through the efforts around rebuilding the Long Island Bridge, looking at the opportunity to operate ferries, especially for less sick individuals, and to invest in the facilities and the programming and the plans for the buildings on Long Island. In the meantime, we need to work with other cities and towns. We need to create we've got an effort underway that we've had for a number of years under the leadership of Mayor Walsh around the Metro Mayor's housing effort. We need a Metro Mayor's response to the opioid crisis, to the crisis of homelessness, to the crisis of mental illness, so that we are truly doing this work in partnership. I know, because I've been following the community of origin data since I joined the City Council in 2016, that the population that is in our city, individuals who are seeking help and then literally and figuratively get stuck in our city because of their illness, because of the sickness, because of their vulnerability, are not from the city of Boston. And we've moved from 40% in 2016 to almost 70% today, not originally from the city of Boston. I don't believe in building a wall around the city of Boston. I quite literally would like to build a bridge to Long Island, and I'm committed to that as mayor of the city. But we need to make sure that other cities and towns are helping us, that other states are helping us. As we think about the burden that has been placed on our continuum of care, on our healthcare system, on our service delivery here in the city of Boston, it is collapsing under the weight. And too many individuals, too many sons and daughters are here from other places. We need other communities to help us in this work. And as mayor of Boston, I will bring together a Metro Mayor's effort on responding to this in a more coordinated way and with partnership in other cities and towns. And we have to do this work as well in partnership with our state delegation, with our state legislators, not just our Boston delegation. Our Boston delegation knows how important this work is. We need to make sure that we have commitments from the non-Boston delegation and that we are doing this work in partnership. And we also need some federal help. I have advocated that we use significant funds, $30 million specifically from the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan funds, because this is sort of the post-COVID or the second leg or last leg of COVID recovery money that's coming into our city. And over this last year and a half, as we appropriately focused on COVID, the pandemic, and testing and vaccination and the healthcare delivery system, we have lost sight of the crisis that's happening at the intersection of Mass and Cass with individuals who are not well and who are also in other parts of our city. We think about downtown, we think about the North End, we think about Nubian Square, we have to think about Charlestown and Andrew Square and in Dorchester and Edward Everett Square, just near my house. We've got people suffering in every part of our city, and we've got to respond with with a great deal of intentionality and focus on helping individuals find wellness, find treatment, and it's expensive. But we do have a once in a generation opportunity with the ARPA funds specifically. When we think about the opportunity in detox and recovery because of COVID, detox and recovery programs were in many cases shut down completely, but their capacity was significantly reduced. We have an opportunity to reopen those programs, get individuals into the appropriate treatment and care that they need, work on wraparound housing, work on family reunification, work on mental health. We need a workforce to help us to do that because we did lose some of the workforce during this last year and a half as well. But with this funding, we have an opportunity in all of these pieces to bring them together to help people get well, to decentralize services at the sort of the intersection of Mass and Cass and beyond, and do this work that individuals deserve, that the community deserves, that the city's residents deserve.
Lisa, how much is the how much are the ARPA funds that are coming in? Do you know?
Well, the ARPA funds in particular, we're receiving close to $500 million. I'm suggesting that we use $30 million.
For Mass and Cass?
Well, for Mass and Cass, for the impacts of the opioid crisis here in the city of Boston.
Okay.
And we refer to the crisis as, because the epicenter is at Mass and Cass.
Right.
There is an opportunity with the most recent settlement with the Attorney General's office and the pharmaceutical companies to actually utilize some of those dollars. I was disappointed to hear some of the earlier plans of Boston getting very little in proportion to some other communities. I would like to see a requirement that if communities are receiving these dollars, especially from the most recent settlement that we have here with the Commonwealth, that with those dollars should also come a commitment to shelter beds, shelter programs, shelter supports, wraparound housing, detox programs, recovery programs, and mental health.
Okay, I believe Andrew has a question.
Yeah, so one, before I forget, thank you very much for helping to steer our acting mayor off of her notion that it would be a great idea to house people in right in the center of Mass Cass with no sense of ever recovering. So
no, I appreciate that, Andy. If I could just, before you get to your question, if I could just say, Victory Programs does some really great work. And I'd like, I want to encourage them to continue to do that work. We just need to find other places to do it. That our city as a whole, but in particular, what's happening in, at Mass and Cass, there are too many services, too many individuals in desperate need of help. We need to make sure that there's a collective response to this crisis and that other communities are helping with it. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's the question, Andy.
That gets into my question anyway. So, number one, I think I personally, I haven't been on all the committees you've been, but I've been in the what used to be called the working group for many years. And I think we collectively made a big mistake in what we were asking for. And the mistake was we were asking for services, which is services, but we were not very specific about what we were asking for. What we were hoping for and thinking we needed was recovery service. There's an office of recovery services. Jen Tracy or Devin Larkin run that office. The only services I've ever seen them put in are harm reduction services. So essentially services that make it more comfortable to be addicted. And in some cases also more safe to be addicted, but more comfortable to be addicted. And I believe it is those services that are attracting the people to Mass and Cass. It isn't the methadone clinics. There's methadone clinics all over the place. There's 1,300 people that go there a day. They were there before, they were there in the early 2014. No one really, Mass Cass wasn't a thing back then. They aren't the problem. It's the harm reduction services that are the problem. So I guess one of the questions is, we have offices called Office of Recovery Services, but they put in harm reduction. you know, as mayor, what would you do to start to get people to think about recovery and prevention and education and more enforcement where needed, where those other things aren't going to work, and away from harm reduction? I don't believe it is possible to get any other city or town or anywhere to put harm reduction. And I believe you know, if you work hard, you can get people to agree to put recovery services in their neighborhood. I would actually help with that, personally speaking about the Hello House. But I think it'd be hard to convince another neighborhood to put in harm reduction services and drop enforcement so that it's a good place to use. So until that happens, I don't see Mass Cast recovering in any profound way. Even if Long Island is fully open, if we have it be the only place in the region that has lax enforcement combined with all this harm reduction, people are going to continue to come here from everywhere. So what would you do to start to change that in any way that you can think, you know?
Okay, so you've asked a couple of things there and made a few statements. I want to, and if I don't get to everything, just interrupt me so at the end and remind me what I missed. So I do believe in harm reduction. I think that there's a lot of work that we need to continue to do to make sure that we're stemming the spread of HIV and AIDS, and a clean needle distribution is an important component of that. We've seen some success with the needle take back program that came from, in many ways, one of the working groups on the Mass and Cast task force a number of months ago. Actually, maybe a year ago, the needle take back was first sort of discussed in a more meaningful way, and that's found its way to our street. And it is important to create opportunities for safety for individuals who are dealing with substance use disorder and stimulant use disorder and being unsheltered and dealing with mental illness. So we do have to continue many of those functions. I do believe Long Island, although many years away, would make a great impact. And in my vision for Long Island is that Long Island isn't a night shelter, that it is a place where people go to find wellness. So it's certainly detox, an opportunity for longer term recovery, workforce development opportunities, certainly mental health, access to mental health care and physical health care, and then also family reunification, which I think is a really important component. And we maybe won't find success for every individual, but family reunification has to be a component of this work. And then as we hopefully find an individual success through this effort, that we're also helping them reshelter or rehouse within communities of origin. So we think about social networks, we think about community bonds, we think about family bonds and how important that is. That's where I think the Metro Mayor's effort can really come into play. We also need to make sure that there is safety for everyone in that area. So our most vulnerable, so those that are experiencing homelessness and substance use disorder, are every day. You see the reports, probably before I see the reports often, of the violence against women. We've seen certainly the increase in rape and sexual rape. We've seen and sexual violence. We've seen the increase in stabbings and shootings and assault in that area. That is tied very much to the drugs on the street. So enforcement has to be a part of this. There's only I think a smaller number of individuals who are very responsible, most directly responsible for the drugs that are on the street every single day. So that creating that safety goes in many different ways. Certainly holding individuals accountable for the drug dealing that happens in that area, and also creating safe environments for individuals who are not well. I can't mute whoever's unmuted. I think that it's also important that we're working every day to decentralize services in that area. There is a direct correlation between the number of individuals who are now unsheltered in the Mass and Cass area and the closing of the Long Island Bridge, the growing reliance on methadone and Suboxone and other drug treatments to help an individual recover. But we also know how little recovery is happening with those that end up staying there for the day. And I talk a lot, I've used this phrase maybe 100 times, but an individual who becomes literally and figuratively stuck at Mass and Cass. So they've come in for healthcare, they've come in to utilize the shelter, they've come in to access methadone, to purchase drugs, to maybe connect with a loved one, and then they literally and figuratively get stuck in that area because an individual who's dealing with a substance use disorder or a stimulant use disorder does have a network in that area. And I do think we have to be very mindful about how strong those bonds are and the community that's been created in that area when we think about how do we disrupt that? How do we interject with services and help for individuals who are not well and get them into the treatment programs that they deserve to be in along the way. So it is, we know it's a complex issue, but we do know that some of the solutions individually are pretty simple. We need to make sure that methadone is accessible in more places. There's been some efforts to help, to make it possible that pharmacies can give out methadone. So, I go to CVS to pick up an antibiotic because someone, one of the boys has got an ear infection. You should be able to also access methadone at a clinic that way, especially when we think about so many of our individuals who are at risk have very much high functioning. And, when we think about the 1,300 individuals who come in to utilize the methadone clinics in that area, many of them go on and off to work. Why do they have to come there every day? Why can't we create, more comfortable, more pleasing? Because I think the other thing that often escapes through this conversation is we talk about the quality of life, we talk about the impact of what's happening in that area on residents, on business owners, on people going to work, for people driving through. But that quality of life also impacts the person who is unsheltered, the person who is not well. They're dealing with the waste and the trash and the violence and the human waste, the same as everybody else.
Exactly.
So can I ask a follow-up? So
Yeah.
I agree with 90% of what you said, or maybe more than that. I see the same vision for Long Island that you do, and I think most of that vision can be done with a ferry. Maybe small percentage of it can't, but most of that vision could be done with a ferry. So, when can it start? I think it's really important to do more than just, I love the idea of reuniting people with their families, except when the family was the cause of the problem in the first place, and workforce training. If you don't do that, you have no reason to expect any other results when someone is out. So but mostly when I talk about harm reduction, you talked about recovery services. Except for the needle exchange, everything else that you mentioned was a recovery service. I do believe it's possible to get other communities to support them, eventually. Shouldn't be that hard. But it's the harm reduction part that is the issue. Now, and I would love to think that it's going to be easy to get distributed needle exchange. I don't have a real even issue with needle exchange as a harm reduction, especially if it was an exchange. We've given up on that, and it's just needle distribution. But even then, if you could go to a community health center and pick up your needles, that alone would not be a reason to come to Mass Cass. But there's so the lax enforcement that I talked about is all of the violence. I'm not saying the only reason for that violence is the lax enforcement, but it's probably by far the biggest contributing factor. Police just sit, you see it any day you want. They sit in a car and they watch open drug deals and Lord knows what else they're watching. Why would you expect that violence wouldn't, you'd have to be crazy to think that violence wouldn't ensue from that. So it's that, those types of services that really need to start to change. And we need to, I don't believe that someone addicted should go to jail for their crime, but they should go to Long Island to help get better. That's not, I mean, it doesn't exist now. I understand.
Right. Well, I mean, we've seen certainly an increase in an interest at the very least to utilize more of the Section 12s and the Section 35s. That is a little bit more deliberate, making sure that individuals at least can see some treatment. You know, we haven't seen sort of the full results of that yet. I am a supporter of Section 12s and Section 35s. I think it's certainly a tool that needs to be in our toolbox. I'm not saying that we're going to blanket start using it, but it's something that we have to be much more, we've got to be more open to utilizing that more. We have to. And as mayor, and this relates certainly to what's happening at Mass and Cass, but across the board, as mayor, we have an office of intergovernmental relations, and there's a person that is, works between the mayor's office and the city council. There's a person who works between the mayor's office and the state delegation. We need to make sure that we've got a built-in relationship between the mayor's office and the court system, that we have a built-in relationship between the mayor's office and our correction system. And there's some work through the Office of Returning Citizens. I've actually been working offline, not sort of publicly facing, but internally, with a group of individuals formerly incarcerated and family members, loved ones, about how do we make sure that that office is truly supporting the returning citizen, the returning city resident, and that we are providing services so that they don't end up at Mass and Cass. We need to make sure that we are stopping all releases from any institution, whether it's South Bay, Nashua Street, a federal or a state corrections facility, to one of our shelters in the city of Boston. The day a person is formerly incarcerated, the re-entry and the return home plan needs to start. And that plan needs to include a housing plan that is not a shelter. And we see, the last time I was down at Mass and Cass, I had a conversation with a young man. I said, how'd you end up here? Just very simple, sort of direct question. He goes, well, I was here before the last time I was released. So when I was released most recently, I figured I at least knew how to navigate the system down here. We have failed that individual 1,700 times over. And if we're not doing the early education, someone asked about the education piece earlier within our schools, and many of you know how important that work is to me. I'm a former classroom teacher. And if we aren't, just committed to not returning people to a shelter after incarceration, that we are preparing them for and supporting them during that period of transition in a different way, we're never going to get ahead of this problem. So it's around the addiction, it's around the opioids, it's around now the stimulants and the changing drugs. It's around a lack of healthcare and access, especially to mental health. Cost of housing is too expensive in this city, but we need to make sure that we have more supportive housing in more places, and that individuals who are returning citizens, returning from incarceration, have services in place to welcome them home, to make sure that that is an easier transition and one that is supported with all the elements, the housing, the employment, family relationships, all of those pieces are really important. I also want to add one thing that, has changed, I think, in a significant way, especially over the last just few years, is the number of women and younger women that we are seeing on Mass and Cass, and how we have to be very specific and intentional about how we're serving them and working to hopefully reunify them with family. Because, I appreciate, Andy, that, family is sometimes the root of the trauma, is the sort of, a causal effect of how an individual ended up sort of at Mass and Cass. But family doesn't necessarily have to be, blood bonds. There are different social networks and community networks that I hope exist for many individuals that we can help them re-engage and reconnect with.
So I've really more follow-up, and I apologize for monopolizing.
I'm sorry, Andy. Well, let's give Isa X a turn to ask.
You know how to get me, Andy. Follow up.
Yeah, you guys seem to have a really great relationship, so maybe you can follow up after the Zoom. But I know Isa X has another question, and then we're running up on time, and I have I guess maybe an announcement, but then I also want to give you an opportunity, Annissa, to address the Herald article that came out yesterday, which I know you probably want to speak about too. So, but I'm going to just give Isa the floor to ask another question, which is a good segue to what you just mentioned about, you know, women, younger women, especially being out now as well.
A lot of the crime, public safety issue, and health concern arise from drug use are centered in Black and Brown communities, and disproportionately affect our elderly family members, our school-age children, and our community in general. If elected mayor, what is your plan to improve this disparity as it relates to the opioid crisis here in our city?
Well, I mean, I'm Isa X, I appreciate that you really, bring that to this discussion today, that you're, quote unquote, uplifting this, because we are often talking about the impacts or the side effects to the crisis and, sort of the quality of life issues and the work that we need to do to make sure that individuals are finding opportunities for lifetime of recovery. But we do often forget about the families that are so directly impacted, especially our families, when we think about families of color, when we think about the impact that has on kids and parents and grandparents, and then the family sort of network, whether by relation or just by community bonds. It has a tremendous impact. It's destabilizing. It impacts certainly a young person's ability to achieve in the classroom. It impacts a family's ability to build wealth and to have stable housing. Certainly impacts the opportunities to just buy the things you need when you've got a family that's been so destabilized. And oftentimes we know that when a loved one, a family member is dealing with a substance use disorder, it costs, literally financially, it costs families a lot of money. And, Andy, we were talking a little bit about family reunification and how that's often really difficult because the family bonds have been so badly broken sometimes by the time an individual ends up being unsheltered and on the street. So thinking about, I'd say also the role of the Office of Recovery Services, it needs to extend to the family and to the community, because recovery is certainly a family and community effort. And there are certain support services that need to be put in place. When we think about the trauma that kids bring to school, again, I'm a former classroom teacher, and when kids are dealing with this trauma at home, we need to be able to be more supportive in our schools, in our classrooms for young people. When families are experiencing this, we need to be more supportive and have resources available in community-based organizations. We think about, trauma response is generally after a violent act, but trauma response should also be available to a family who is dealing with both when a loved one is dealing with a substance use disorder or mental illness, but also when we think about the communities and we think about the kids over at Orchard Gardens, they're experiencing trauma, and there should be and needs to be a trauma response to what the children in that school building or at the Mason School or at the Edward Everett School, what they're dealing with, what they're seeing every day. It may not be direct to them, but secondary trauma is very real. And, those experiences, we have to support, especially our young people, the most with that. And we think about, I think the disproportionate impact it has on our Black and Brown kids, especially, it's all very real. And I think that that's an important role that our Office of Recovery Services could play. And I think it's also something really important for trauma services to also be equipped to respond to.
Thank you.
Stephanie, can I make a quick comment just in response? One thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I come from the private sector, and so I'm trying to kind of apply things that might not fit in certain government places, but there seems to be such a disconnect between, for example, just the kids at Mason, right? Or the kids that want to play Pop Warner at Clifford Park, and then the services down the street. And I just wonder, if I were in private sector, it would be some kind of shared goal that you have, and then you work together with a different department, and your bonus or whatever is based on it. And coming back to kind of this situation, when we have city grants or RFRs or RFPs or states, can we tie in like the student impact or a student survey or 50 more kids this year felt safe enough to sign up for football into those grants, because it just feels like it's so siloed otherwise. And
Yeah.
people can say, hey, I really care about the community. And I know they do, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
it's like there's more of a forcing mechanism, for lack of better words, or, if the numbers here don't go up, the funding extra goes down, or I just wonder
Yeah.
if there's something to
Yeah.
tie it in together.
I'll be honest, Ryan, I appreciate the question or the comment. Really the idea, I haven't thought about that. I think that's certainly an important concept, right? So how do we make that real? I'm not sure, but I think that's it's interesting. I'd like to sort of digest that a little bit, maybe think about that a little bit more. I agree with you on the silo piece. I mean, this is across everything the city does. Whether it's the city doing it, whether it's nonprofit community-based organizations doing it, or the for-profit private sector doing this work, we do function too much in silos. And there are lessons to learn from the private sector, because if the bottom line matters, you're measuring dollars. And if it helps a private interest or private business make more dollars, they're going to figure out a way to do it. And in government, in the public sector, and even in nonprofit sector, we're not focused necessarily on the bottom dollar, right? Nor should we be, because that's what we're there for. That's our function. But there are other things that we should be measuring. And if we're going to say youth engagement is a critical measurement that we want to excel at, then we should find ways to get that done. And whether we convert that to dollar signs or whatever it is to motivate individuals, we've got to do that. But the silos piece is really important. And I think the easiest way to break down those silos is, for me as mayor, when I'm building a team, when I'm building my cabinet, which are overlooking all of the different aspects, because absolutely what's happening in with the opioid crisis is impacting education, certainly impacting public health, certainly our healthcare system, certainly impacting our public safety system. When we think about the work of police and EMS especially, it's certainly impacting our transportation system, our public works department. Like, you think about just the function of cleaning up trash and emptying the barrels and picking up, all of these pieces are so interconnected. So a cabinet needs to be made up of people who are willing to think. And it's not even that creatively or innovatively, it's just who are able to think together at the same time and work through these problems. Ryan, I'm going to think about that a little bit more, because I think that's an interesting idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was a great idea.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that, but that's a really great idea too.
I mean, we do things in our schools, the youth behaviors risk survey that we do. It's mandated, so we do it pretty regularly. A lot of our schools will do school environment studies. Or like, how do you feel about your school? Those sorts of surveys. I think that there's an opportunity to find some data points in which to measure growth. I will say though, I'm not a big fan of spending too much time on studies. We know the work that needs to be done. We got to get to it. I think that that's my greatest skill set, and sort of the thing that I bring to the table is my interest in doing the work and getting to it, not wasting time.
Right, but it would be a good way for accountability, or to incentivize organizations, or to incentivize the city to do more,
Yeah.
So that was a great idea. So I guess I'll end with, saying that we had an opportunity, like many people, many Bostonians, to read the Herald and their article yesterday, basically criticizing the task force. We did read some quotes from you in the Herald, which I'm sure you probably had an opportunity to read as well. Of course, Sheriff Thompson actually talked about Marty Martinez and his role in, or his leadership or lack thereof, of the task force, and really just kind of, pointed the finger at him, saying that his lack of leadership has been the reason that the task force hasn't been successful. And us, the South End Roxbury Community Partnership, we've sent numerous emails to Marty Martinez asking for a plan, requesting, we've sent public record requests. One of our members, Marla, Murphy has sent a public record request for the meeting minutes. She hasn't received any, or she received some that were really disorganized. She essentially was told that there haven't been any meetings. Today we launched a petition online on our on change.org and through our social media, calling for Marty Martinez's resignation. Now, I'm not asking you to point the finger directly at Marty Martinez, because that would be messy. But I'm asking you to use this time, if you'd like, to elaborate on what you would like to see from the task force, because I saw in your plan that you still suggest a task force. And so I want you to use this time, if you like, to share what you would like to see in the task force, what hasn't worked, and what you think will work, and what you would implement as a mayor.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and I appreciate you not asking such direct questions, because some of this is in our control, some of it isn't. Especially until you have sort of the authority and the capacity of the mayor's office. First, I'd say, this is what's happening at Mass and Cass, but it's across our city. When we think about the opioid crisis and the impacts of homelessness and a lack of mental health care, we've all failed, right? There isn't one person who has failed in this issue. It is a collective effort. I ran for office the first time to have certain responsibility to, there's an expectation that I be held accountable for these things. I'm running for mayor. I'm not going to say, I'm mayor of the city and I want no responsibility. I want this responsibility. I do think that the task force, in some ways, because of COVID, which becomes an easy excuse at times, but COVID for sure was a factor. I think that the task force started with great interest and great action and activity. I'm a big believer in action items. We spent an initial period of time discussing. We broke up into these working groups that did help, I think, a different number of people understand a little bit more about what's happening down there, but then not sort of take that next step. We've identified the quality of life working group, for example. We identified the need for these portable bathrooms, especially at the onset of COVID. We knew about it before, but COVID really, talk about showing a light on a problem. But when people had no access to restrooms, they were going outside. So the mobile bathrooms is a real thing, but then we could never sort of move on it, which became a real frustration for a number of members of the task force. So I don't think it needs to go away. I think it needs to it certainly needs to be empowered. And I will say, I talked a little bit about building a cabinet. I believe in shared power. I'm going to lead this city. The buck will stop with me. The responsibility will be with me. I'll get to, do the ribbon cuttings and be held accountable because my name's on the ballot. But I think you need to empower the people around you that you ask to help you lead in this work. And I think if you're going to form a task force, you need to also empower them. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to bring this group of people together. You certainly need a diversity of experience and representation. And you also need a diversity of sort of voice and allowing that movement to happen. And, I think that's where we went wrong in sort of the most recent iteration of the task force. And I think there's some conflict, and conflict's okay, because conflict makes us better, and conflict helps us make better decisions, more thoughtful decisions. But we, I think, failed to ever get to that point where we're making real decisions. So I do hope that, I don't really care what the name of the task force is. I don't know whether we go to a 3.0, whatever it is. It just needs to have the authority and the opportunity to do the work and to make decisions and, make both incremental decisions, so decisions that will make people have a better experience today, while also focused on the long term. That piece is really important to me, and we could never get out of our way. And in my comments in the Globe, in the Herald, I haven't actually read the article in its entirety. I sort of glanced at it because I understood basically what it was about. There's also politics at play. That's the unfortunate reality of what's happening right now. And I think it's really unfortunate. I always say I'm a city councilor today. I'm running for mayor and I hope to be mayor in November, whenever I get sworn in before Thanksgiving because of the dynamics of this race. But I still have a commitment and a responsibility to do this work today. And it's very frustrating when politics gets played, people slow roll you through your work, and you get jammed up. And I don't get hurt in the end. Who gets hurt? The people at Mass and Cass, the people that live in the South End and Roxbury, the family members, the loved ones of the people who are dealing with this struggle, the kids with the trauma. That's who gets hurt when we play politics and slow roll this work. So, I look forward to getting through this quickly. I'm very much motivated to continue doing this work. And, I'm here to talk about that in my current capacity. And I hope I have an opportunity to lead this city and demonstrate fully what I can do as mayor with that authority and with that power and with the right team in place to lead on all of these pieces.
Annissa, I have one last question, and I know you have to go because it's 7:34, but this one thing that keeps burning me with the recent incident that happened with Giovanni Gendra. How can you help with families whose loved ones are navigating addiction, who are a Mass and Cass that we may not have identified them and we whatever, and they pass away, whether it's over an overdose or asthma attack or whatever the case may be, and they sit in the Boston Medical Center morgue for days, weeks, and if I'm not mistaken, in other different platforms, individuals have sat in the BMC morgue for months. How can, as a city, can we address that? Because as a mom of 2 boys, I think I would completely fall apart mentally, spiritually, and emotionally if I find out that anything happened to my children, and I find out 2 to 3 days later, 2 months later. How can, as a city, we kind of address that there is a better system in identifying individuals that are in that location, to not necessarily to keep data about who belongs in Boston, who doesn't, but also the part of, families are looking for their loved ones. You know what I mean? They haven't heard from, how can we work on really addressing that? Because I think that's pretty sad.
Yeah, I'm a mother of 4 boys. I don't know how you pick yourself up off the floor. I think that's that incident there, that tragedy, that travesty, that speaks to the problem of silos, that speaks to the disconnect between government and agencies and organizations that should all be existing in concert with one another. There shouldn't be. And it's unfortunate that we have a Facebook page dedicated to finding loved ones, that we, have the moms that are, out there looking for their children, that, that example there just speaks to the isolation that people are operating in. And I don't know whether that's a desire to hold on to certain power and information, but I think it also speaks to the problem of silos. And that is the perfect example of when we don't connect and we're not talking and we're not working on these issues together in partnership, that this is what happens. I don't, other than to say we have to break down those walls, we've got to work in better partnership. We've got to put procedures and processes in place that we avoid that. I don't know how that's what we have to do. And it speaks to how broken the system is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for meeting with us and taking the time to meet with us. I know we really appreciate it. What do you have, a month left until
4 weeks from tomorrow for election day, and I certainly hope to have everyone's support. I'd also love it if we've been very specific in our rollout of our sort of formal policy docs. You run for mayor, you're going to put some of these things in different format online, but they're all dynamic documents, and I want them to continue to be informed. So take a look at them, read them. I've got certainly my own sort of core values and the things that are really important to me. But the people that are doing this work every single day should be informing it. If you get a particular passion, show me the way, because, I want to lead this city, but I need help doing it. So I hope that you'll take a look and inform the work. It's all done on Word documents, so we can edit it. And we should do, and that part of my style is, periodically you got to reflect on your practice. You got to reflect on, what you're in the midst of. And, sometimes you decide, this particular road isn't working. Let's try it a different way. And I need people around me that can inform it. So I'm
Right.
grateful.
We're all learning. We're all learning from this. I mean, I have opinions now that I didn't have a few months ago, on this, and it's we all learn through this, and through talking with each other. And so, yeah, it's important. But thank you so much for meeting with us, and I know we really do appreciate it. And good luck.
Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Everybody gone with everybody? Yeah, hello. What am I doing? Bye.